Welcome to another episode of Metal Mastermind. Today we're gonna show you how to get a metal guitar bass tone, or at least something that's usable, just using the plugins in your studio that you already have. Now make sure you hang around till the end of the video because we actually have something that's a much better option for metal bass guitar tones. But let's start out with what you already have right now. Your studio plugins, the plugins in your DAW. So we're gonna jump into the studio. I'm gonna share the plugins and share my recommended settings for you, or at least the settings that you can start with to get a pretty decent bass guitar tone. First, let's hear what just the bass guitar sounds like plugged into the studio, dry by itself, no effects, nothing. All right, so that was kind of bland, but hey, we've got a signal. That's our starting point. Now let's dig into some plugins that you already have and we can make this tone sound a lot better. All right, so the first thing I do is I drag a compressor plugin into that track. Now, another quick tip here, you'll notice I already have a bass line recorded here, and I suggest you record just 30 seconds or so of playing bass like you normally would so that you can test the sounds as you're pulling these plugins in and changing the settings and so forth. It just makes the process easier. What I like to do is I like to use what's already there behind the scenes, and I'll go through the default settings in my DAW for this compressor and I'll just choose the bass setting. Most all DAWs are going to have some kind of default setting for each instrument, and it may not be an ideal setting for your music. However, it is a great place to start. It's just going to be a little bit less tweaking that you have to do. Now, the reason why we put the compressor in first, or the reason why I do that, is because I want to compress that initial signal coming in so that my notes are level across the board. Then I'll add in the other stuff. The next plugin I'll drag in is the EQ plugin from my DAW. And of course, most every DAW is gonna have an EQ plugin. That's the beauty of this little video here. Now, a quick note, some people prefer to put the EQ before the compressor, and they'll put an EQ after the compressor as well. I'm just showing you how I do it. You can always switch things around and try different tactics and see what suits you, but this is just the way I do it here. So we've got our EQ plugin, and just like we did with the compressor, I'll find a default setting to start with that's already pre-programmed for bass guitar. And then once you get that, you can kind of play around with that. You can press play and hear your track, listen to your track, and make those adjustments as you're listening to that bass line that you've already recorded. Again, that's why you want to record some type of bass track first so that you can hear it as you're playing around with these settings. Now, this isn't it. We're going to add something else, but I just want you to hear what this sounds like so far. Now, there's another plugin that I like to drop in after all this stuff, and that's a channel strip. Most every DAW has some type of channel strip, and this is just really a series of plugins that you have in one plugin here. Now, you could just use the channel strip, but I'm just showing you kind of a little trick here on how I like to do things to get a little bit better bass tone. I like to drop the channel strip in below everything else I've already put in, the compressor and the EQ. So we've already got that first initial signal that we're working with. It's compressed, then we've got it EQ'd the way we want it. So now we're just gonna drop in some extra push with that channel strip. So here's the channel strip. Now, the first thing I do, as you may have guessed, I'll find the default setting in my DAW for bass guitar, and I'll just plug that in and use that to start with. Now, one thing I do though is I actually turn the compression off in the channel strip. Most channel strips are gonna have a compressor. I turn that off because we've already compressed the signal from the start, so I don't really need that. But you do have some other EQ settings and a gain setting and just some different things you can do to shape and tweak your tone a little bit further. So let's hear what this thing sounds like with the channel strip added. So these three plugins that you already have in your DAW, this is a great starting point to get at least a decent and usable bass tone. Here's the thing though, we don't really know what this sounds like in the full mix, so let's listen to the full mix with this plugin chain. Okay, so that's not too bad. Maybe it's not the perfect metal bass tone, and we'll just agree with that, but it's usable. You can hear the bass notes in there, they're prominent, and it's filling in those low-end spots that you need to fill in when you're playing metal music. And there's clarity to the bass as well. Now, I did have the bass track cranked up a little bit for the purpose of this video so you could hear it better. I know sometimes on YouTube, you might not be able to hear the bottom end notes on YouTube here. So I did crank that up a little bit so that you could hear it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, Jason, okay, so yeah, it's a usable bass tone, but it's just not working for metal. Well, fortunately, there are other options you can use, and these aren't necessarily included in your DAW, but there's some free options out there, and I'm going to share one with you. This is a plugin from TSE called the BOD. It's just a bass overdrive here, so I'm going to pull that into the track here. I'm going to turn everything else off, and this is what the BOD looks like. You can see it on screen here. The big thing about this is there is a drive setting on here, so you can get that nice distorted growling bass tone. So let's hear what that sounds like real quick. So that was pretty cool, but how does that sound in the full mix? Let's hear it. We're not quite done yet. We've got one more tone that I want you to hear, and what we're going to do now is we're actually going to turn back on the initial compressor and EQ that we have in the track, and then we're going to have the BOD turned on after that. Okay, so let's hear what that sounds like in the full mix. So those plugins combined, the compressor and the EQ that you already have in your DAW, and then of course there's the free TSE BOD plugin, those really added more punch to that bass. I felt anyway, at least in the studio here, and hopefully you could hear it well on YouTube there. Now, the thing is, the BOD's not the only free plugin out there. There's a lot of different plugins out there for bass, so if you're on a budget, and sometimes these free plugins are sometimes they sound just as good as the paid plugins out there, especially when you're combining that free plugin with the plugins that you already have in your DAW, like I just showed you. Man, you've got that compressor, EQ, you already have those. Use them, and I actually encourage you to use those plugins first that you already have, so that you can tweak those and mess around with those and just learn how to use them appropriately before paying for a plugin. Because if you don't know how to use the free stuff, you may have a hard time with the paid versions as well. And this is just a good way to level up your skills and just to get better at doing what you do in the studio. On that note, we actually have a free home studio guide that you can download. There is a link in the description of this video, so I highly encourage you to grab a copy of that. Ken and I worked really hard at putting that together here. Ken Canellis, he's the co-owner here with me of Metal Mastermind, and we just wanted to give you something just extremely solid to build your home studio with. And even if you already have your studio built, which I know a lot of you do, I think you're still going to find some golden nuggets in this free guide. So make sure you download that. Again, the link is in the description of this video. Guys, please give this a thumbs up. Let us know if you have any questions in the comments below, and we will see you on the next Metal Mastermind.